Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar called Building Business Analysis Capability in a Consulting Business. I'm your host, Deb Oliver, and on behalf of IIBA, we thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You know, webinars are one way to continue to hone your skill set as a BA practitioner, but there are also reference resources such as the BABOK Guide or the IIBA online library, which contains hundreds of titles and videos related to business analysis work. At IIBA, we are all about uniting a community of professionals to create better business outcomes. And today is actually a testament to that, with all of you joining us this afternoon to hear more about building business analysis capability in a consulting business. Today, we have 3 senior consulting BAs from version 1, and they are here to talk about how at version 1 they have turned challenges into opportunities. Specifically, the way in which they've built a thriving business analysis community of practice. They've developed a consulting perspective. They've built their own skills development initiatives and broadened the impact of business analysis in their organization. Now, may I introduce Scott Coombs, Sean Ryan, and Keir Wytuck to share their experiences at version 1. Over to you, Sean, or Scott.
Hi, thanks, Deb. Scott here. First of all, thanks very much to the IIBA for letting us make this presentation. You know, I think it's really great the way that the IIBA has allowed us to, as a BA community, kind of develop our skills and our knowledge as BAs. But of course, it's also great that they've created this community for us to share our experiences and ideas. So I'm really delighted to be here, and I think the 3 of us are delighted to be here to do just that. So we're going to cover 3 topics in the next 40 or 50 minutes. Starting off by saying, well, what is a consulting BA and how is it different than an in-house BA? Some of these differences aren't necessarily unique to being a consulting BA, but these are things that we think typify the kind of environments we work in and the kind of skills and tasks that we perform. Then we'll move on to how we have used BABOK to help us build our own BA practice, both as an internal organization and also to help better serve our customers. And then finally, we've just taken 2 specific industries where the 3 of us have some experience ourselves, and to try and see how the core concepts of BA practice apply specifically to those areas. And then all going well, we'll have some time for discussion. Before we start, I'll just give you a quick introduction to the company that we work for, which is called version 1. It was founded in Ireland in 1996, but today we are UK and Ireland and have a revenue of 75 million euros and over 900 staff across the 2 geographies. We provide IT consulting, delivery, and support. So we build systems, we do enterprise architecture, we do support, we do quite a lot of consulting in Oracle and Microsoft. We're Oracle Platinum Partner, and we're Microsoft Gold Partner in I think 12 areas. We also operate in a wide range of industries, particularly government and financial services, utilities, pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, and biomedical. And another feature of version 1 that the BA community has kind of been at the ground level in developing is the notion of capabilities. So Deb had mentioned a BA practice. We call that capabilities in here. So as consultants, we have a mixture of chargeable and non-chargeable time. And in order to make best use of our non-chargeable time, we've created these capabilities to help us develop our own careers in whatever practice we're working in, and also to just refine our skills so that when we get back off the bench, we're better than we were when we went on it. We have 7 of those capabilities in version 1. The capability that we as BA sit in is called Business Transformation and Change, and that includes BA plus enterprise analysis, enterprise architecture, testing, and a couple others. Oh, project management, sorry, yes. So that's version 1. So the first topic we want to look at is what is a consulting BA? And I think it's kind of, the way I see it is there's kind of 3 main areas that distinguish a consulting BA from an in-house BA. And I might just point out at the start that when I say consulting BA, I'm referring specifically to an IT consulting BA. Version 1 is kind of an IT consultancy. We don't do, the BAs don't do a lot of strategic business analysis, although it is called on from time to time. And as we become more embedded in our markets and with our customers, the BAs anyway are looking forward to getting more and more opportunity to do management consulting. But primarily throughout our history we've been on the IT delivery side, and the BAs are focused on that.
Sean here. So speaking from Scott's point of view there, version 1 has come from that background of technology. We go into implement technology projects, but from the business analysis point of view, quite often that gives us the challenges, and that's why we wanted to have this conversation around consulting and business analysis. This is our perspective on it, and it's not the be-all and end-all in terms of how we actually manage this. But as business analysts, when we go in on these projects, we're the first ones on site quite often, and we end up with all the various legacy factors on the actual customer side that we have to manage and deal with. So that's part of our challenges, and that's why we try and manage in our consultancy and our capability here.
Yeah. So one area where a consulting BA might be a little bit different is what I call fragmentation. So BAs are often only part of one phase of the project. Because we're involved in a sales cycle, oftentimes we're part of the initiative after the discovery has already been done, and maybe a tender has been published and we've responded to, and fortunately for us won the tender. But a lot of the work in trying to identify the scope is often kind of presented to us, and our ability to influence that mightn't be as open as it would be if we were there from the very beginning during the discovery phase. Another aspect of it is what I call segmentation. So BAs are seen as part of a predefined project and often excluded from enterprise analysis and solution assessment. So we come in to do a delivery. When the delivery is complete, we're gone. And obviously there's so much more that a BA can contribute if the BA were there in-house for the full life cycle. But we come in, we get out.
So one of the areas that we find that we have a challenge with quite often, we go into projects, and we've done this on various financial sector businesses here. Our customers, they have gone out to tender, they have looked at the various solutions they might need for a project. They've gone through all of the stakeholder analysis and all the business benefits of this and early requirements gathering. So they come to a point where they actually have chosen a preferred solution, whether it's an application or an online solution. What happens in terms of the business analysis team is when we arrive in, this solution is presented to us. This is the best of breed application that is going to be implemented on the project. Why we actually find our challenges, and we've had this a number of times, is that when we start looking at the solution, the initial requirements gathering is done at such a high level that the actual solution may not be best for the application. We end up having to challenge some of those initial requirements going back and where they came from. So by not being involved in the solution assessment, we end up with challenges about how do we manage that, how do we manage those ultimate requirements from it. What we also have, and I will discuss later on, a bit of a case study, is we may come in for a project, and as part of that we do actually have a chance to recommend various products, a bit of product evaluation. So that's where we come in, and we can actually add additional value from that consultancy world as to what product is best suited for the latter phase of a project. It may not be the initial solution, and quite often this is in something like business intelligence, for example. So we have the problems of the customer have already chosen all the various products and the business benefits, but are not necessarily had any input into that.
And sorry, it's Keir here. So just to bring it back to the BABOK in terms of the knowledge areas that we tend to focus on. So we are very interested in the business analysis, planning and monitoring knowledge area, elicitation and collaboration, requirements lifecycle management, and the requirements analysis and design definition knowledge area. And as Scott mentioned previously, enterprise analysis and solution assessment, or actually it's strategy analysis now, we touch on, but we don't tend to get too heavily involved in.
And then the third broad area where we focus on is implementation. So we come in, we have to hit the ground running very quickly. Well, obviously, we don't have much time to get to know the organization, its processes, its culture, and technologies. So one of the reasons why we've developed this practice is to help VAs to become productive as quickly as possible, and also to take advantage of that newness and that being a stranger coming in from the outside, and it often gives you a certain freedom that you wouldn't have if you were either embedded in the organization or seen somehow as being part of the organization that you're delivering the services to. So from our perspective, the change scope, for the most part, we are helping to deliver scope and implement it. Now this isn't the only way we work, but I would say that this is the kind of the typical way. This is what makes us different from an in-house VA. So we have stakeholders that contribute to a tender development project process that goes into procurement, which then our company will win, and then we deliver what was committed to in the procurement process. Sometimes we have the ability to pull back and go back to stakeholders and challenge some of those requirements, but we don't have kind of a blank check when it comes to that. So we often have to just work with what has been handed to us in terms of solution scope.
So a couple of things that, a couple of challenges that present themselves in this particular area, which we see from time to time. Often when we get the RFP, for example, which contains a list of requirements, those requirements may not necessarily have been written by a trained VA. They may have been written by a product specialist. They may have been written by an external third party. So really, what we need to do is we need to try and ensure that we have a good starting point for the engagement. So we have what we've developed a risk assessment tool, is what we've called it. It's a requirements risk assessment tool. So effectively, it allows us to measure the quality of the requirements that we use as a starting point for the engagement, and we can identify where the gaps are and where maybe we need to take mitigating actions in order to make sure that we actually get off on a strong footing. That's one of the challenges we face. Another challenge that we can have is sometimes there's no clear business case coming into an engagement. So the client has an idea of what they want to do, but they're not necessarily sure of what the business benefits are of implementing a particular solution. So and really what we need to do in that case is we need to help the client come up with a strong business case that contains benefits that are as measurable as possible. So there are examples, particularly in the financial services industry, where you may have benefits that are intangible, you can't measure them. Regulatory changes often lead to those types of situations. But as much as possible, try and get some measurable benefits. It's in the client's best interest, and it's also in our best interest, so that at the end of the project, we can claim success based on those measurable, tangible benefits.
One of those areas that benefit realization that sometimes we struggle with is based around the phase of delivery, because quite often we are chargeable up until a certain delivery point. We may never get to actually ramp back up, check out the fact that we have realized the benefits that we promised in this project. So measuring the benefits in advance gives us that chance to give something extra to customers so that they can measure and validate the success of the project afterwards.
Just on to finish up on Sean's point there, once we've actually delivered the solution, generally we tend to be out the door fairly rapidly as consultants. So sometimes we don't actually, we're not around to see the solution implemented, and therefore it's very difficult for us to be involved in the realization of those benefits post-implementation. Okay, so maybe it's time to look at a few of the techniques and approaches that a consulting business analyst generally tends to rely on. There's a lot of techniques documented in the BABOK. I'm not going to go through all of them. We're just going to pick out a few key ones which we find very useful when we're getting into a client's environment and when we're trying to get up to speed very quickly on understanding the business domain and the problem or opportunity. So for starters, we don't prescribe any particular business analysis approach. We do an analysis of the organization and the specific project attributes to try and determine whether a plan-driven approach is better or a change-driven approach is more suitable. But often the client will have a organizational process assets which will determine how the approach that we're actually going to use. In addition to that, there are we tend to do all the requirements up front in many engagements. When we get into the design phase of an engagement, you have the opportunity to go iterative at that point, but we tend to try and do as much of the requirements as we can up front, typically because in a consulting type engagement there would be those payment milestones which are linked to the completion of the requirements piece. So if we have a look at some of the techniques that are particularly useful for the consulting BA, traceability is the first one that comes to mind, and this is very important because it allows us to demonstrate that a particular requirement has actually been delivered and that requirement is traced back to a business objective or a business need, so we can demonstrate that we've actually delivered value through traceability. Another useful technique is modeling, and this is really a key technique for us in version 1, and we've been putting a lot of effort into trying to develop the modeling skills of all of the business analysts at all levels within the organization. And we ran a Model Fest session there recently, which was basically a half-day exercise in which all of the business analysts got into a room. We presented a typical business problem to them and asked them to come up with some models to describe the business problem. And then we compared and contrasted the models and had some discussion afterwards. So modeling is a really key skill for the business analyst, particularly when you're going into an environment where you don't necessarily understand the business domain fully, and you have to very quickly get up to speed and also be able to very quickly communicate with other stakeholders on the project. Business cases, I've mentioned that previously. It's a technique that's mentioned in the BABOK. So very important as well. We need to make sure as consulting BAs that we understand what the business benefits are that are being delivered. Stakeholder management is the next one, and this is very important again because when you're coming into an engagement, it might be a new client, it might be a new project, you may be dealing with stakeholders that you haven't interacted with before. It's very important that you understand who those stakeholders are, what role they play within the organization and on the project, what level of influence they may have on the project, and what interest they have in the success of the particular project. And then finally, there's also certain soft skills, influencing skills and negotiation skills, which are needed for all business analysts, but become particularly acute in the consulting area where you don't have a lot of time to build relationships with stakeholders, and yet you still have to ensure that you can influence them effectively.
So the impact on knowledge areas, I think we've touched on it a little bit. Keir had mentioned some of the knowledge areas that we kind of live and breathe in. And I'll just add to that by saying oftentimes the tasks we perform in the knowledge areas is a function of the length and depth of the relationship with the client. So oftentimes our relationship with the client will begin in the core area of analysis and design definition with elicitation, and then as we build that trust relationship with the client, it gets broadened out and we start to touch on solution evaluation and strategy analysis. And then finally, I'll just end this section by pointing out a few other what I call peculiarities of the consulting BA. The first one we've touched on briefly. You have to really quickly learn the lingo at your customer's business, including what kind of templates they have, where they can be found, and the various different relationships among stakeholders. You have to build up trust quickly, but that's also an opportunity. Sometimes assumptions are made and become common currency, and the BA that's coming in from the outside can challenge things in a way that somebody on the inside couldn't. We also, this next one, parallel objectives. It's hard to describe, but you're coming in to deliver value in terms of the service that you're providing and the solution that you're helping to achieve, but you're also trying to extract that value because obviously you're there on hire from the consulting firm. So we've got parallel objectives. They both can be met, obviously, but both have to be borne in mind while you're performing your BA work. Now, from version 1's perspective, we tend to focus on process optimization and service delivery. We tend not to design products like we wouldn't be going in and looking at the next version of Microsoft Word. And then finally, because we are part of the sales cycle, one of the peculiarities of consulting BA, at least in our environment, is that a lot of the expectations can be set before the relationship with the BA actually begins. And as Keir had mentioned before, we have built this risk assessment template to try and address that, so that when we get brought in and the project manager that's been assigned wants to plan the milestones, we've already given us enough contingency based on what the BA thinks are the key risks to scope.
So it is interesting when going in from consulting BA, because we do have that freedom to act done. We have a very short time frame to be done because we are expected to be experts in our fields. So we can play the fool for a while and then show how our knowledge helps. What really helps in terms of our clients, that quite often our customers are in their industry. They've been in that industry for 10, 15, 20 years. It's hard to see the wood for the trees. We can extract that from other clients, other customers, other industry sectors, and reapply our value to that. And it's interesting, but the biggest challenge I think we find going into these customer sites is we have a language issue. We have to learn the business language, the office language, straight away to discover what the terms are and try and relate those into our own experience. So it's interesting, it's fun, it's challenging at the start, but there's only a short time frame where we can actually do that.
There's also there's a great opportunity for us as BAs who are external to an organization coming into an organization to use the maybe the experience that we've gained from working in other domains to abstract a problem domain out and come up with an appropriate solution. So that's something that I think can add a lot of value to an engagement for a consulting BA.
Okay, so for the next 10 minutes, thereabouts, I just want to spend, or we'll spend a little bit of time telling you the story about the BA practice in version 1, how it got started, how it's developed, and where we are now. So here's our potted history. So in the beginning, we were all solo artists. We tended to get recruited because of a specific project need. So there was really no alignment in the way we were working. Version 1 had invested in its own methodology, so there was some structure in place, but there was no enforcement of that structure. We were all pretty much out on site or out with our project, plowing our own furrow. So we had developed different skill sets, different ways of working, all appropriate to the customer's need, but we didn't really have a lot of cross-pollinization.
Which basically meant, from our customer's point of view, there wasn't a version 1 experience. There wasn't a benefit. It was, we acted as independent contractors to some extent.
So in about 2009, we took a strategic decision to adopt the BABOK as the basis for an alignment of BA practice in version 1. And in the beginning, it was really no more than that. We saw the value of, I think it was version 1.6 at the time when we were first evaluating it. But we saw the value of certification based on experience, and we liked the flexibility of the knowledge areas and the task-based approach. So we could see how we could use it from the very beginning. And for those of you who have been around since that version of BABOK, it was not meant to be prescriptive. So there was kind of a gap, and that gap has largely been filled in version 3. But at the time, we saw a gap between the tasks and the knowledge areas and actual BA practice on the ground, which is something we tried to fill with our own framework. So in that period, 2009 to 2013, we developed our own framework based on the BABOK, but something that had something a little bit more boots on the ground advice to BAs on how to perform that practice, giving our customer base at the time. And then we also started the path towards certification, and we have currently 3 CBAPs. 2 have already been recertified. And then things have picked up. The company has invested, as I said, quite a lot in the capabilities side of the business, and we've benefited from that. So the investment has allowed us to broaden the scope of our activities. We actually promote business analysis in the company generally, not just for BAs, but for people that are in support, people that are in sales, people that are in solution development. And we've also started looking at our own capability mapping and maturity. So we have quite a lot of learning and development in version 1. In the BA space, that learning plan or that learning contract that we develop is linked to the capability gaps that have been identified when we look at each BA's alignment with the maturity model that we have here. So some of the initiatives that we've brought forward in version 1 during that history is, like I said before, CBAP, and now that we have the 4 levels, we've got 2 BAs that have applied recently for the entry-level certificate. Interestingly, that is something that we try to do ourselves. We have a junior BA program, so we have quite a lot of graduates. We also have quite a lot of people at various levels in their career in version 1 that want to get into business analysis. So we have a method of giving them some classroom-based training, some training in our own materials, our own templates, our own methods. and we're developing, this is kind of a work in process, but we have a mixture of rotation and shadowing that allows them to take that classroom learning and that familiarity with BABOK and our own materials and get some practical experience so that they can be assigned independently and not supported by a senior BA. In the area of expertise, we've developed our own perspective extension to BABOK 3 called the Consulting Perspective, and a lot of these slides are basically drawn on the work we had done in developing that. We also have developed our own tools and templates. I think we've talked about the risk assessment template, but we've also, the nice thing about having a lot of clients in a lot of different environments, a lot of different artifacts, we can amalgamate those artifacts into a nice gallery of example outputs that people can turn to for inspiration. And in order to deepen the knowledge of BABOK in the organization, we have something called the BABOK Book Club. So we use Yammer a lot for kind of ad hoc communication between BAs. And the BABOK Book Club basically is a month on, month off. So in 1 month, we will read a chapter. And in the second month, we discuss it. And the rule is you have to make 1 comment and 1 reply. There's about 20 BAs in the organization, so that usually keeps the conversation going.
So one of the areas that we've had a challenge with in version 1 is the very fact that we do have 20 BAs across the organization. A lot of us are out on site, very rarely in the same place at the same time. So it's hard to actually measure how we're doing. What we have developed as well is we have a quarterly rhythm here in version 1 in terms of our reviews and our performance and our career. What we've done here is we've got a scoring mechanism, and things like conversations with the BABOK Book Club gives you points. Points effectively wins prizes, I suppose, to some extent, because it all adds up into our quarterly rhythm in terms of your review and linking in with your capability. So again, challenges to try and manage how we, for those of us who are not on site all the time or often in the head office, how do we keep our review and our score together and our career together?
So some of the other initiatives that we have looked at, version 1 has a college graduate recruitment program. So twice annually, I think it is at the moment, we'll take college graduates who are interested in pursuing a career in IT. And there could be developers, they could turn into software developers, testers, business analysts, project managers. But at that stage of their careers, they don't really know what they want to do. So we've developed a business analysis course, which is a fairly high-level BA 101 type course, which is aimed at the grads coming into the organization, just to give them an idea of what the business analysis role is all about, to help them make a more informed decision when it comes to specializing further. We also recognize within the company that there are business analysis activities going on right across the company, across the various different capabilities. We have a managed services division which is responsible for managing all of our application outsourcing. And they deal with a lot of change requests and RFCs. So they're undertaking parts of the BA role just in their day-to-day work. So we've recognized that, and we've tried to come up with some training material which is aimed at providing the basic business analysis skills to those types of people within the company. In addition to that, we've looked at the competency assessment framework, the IIBA's competency assessment framework. It's something that we are looking at doing a bit more work on. We're just waiting for the revised version to nail itself down, and then we're looking at lining that up with the learning plans and career paths of our business analysts. And then finally, just on the leadership side, around the strategic planning, we basically what we did is we looked at all of the business analysis capabilities that we thought would be useful both internally to version 1 and externally to our clients. We ranked them in order of importance, and we analyzed them to see where were the gaps. And basically what that gave us was a map of the business analysis capabilities and which were the ones that we needed to prioritize in terms of closing those gaps. So a lot of our strategic planning is based on that business analysis capability analysis, and it's actually a technique in the BABOK around business capability analysis. We used that technique in terms of our strategic planning for the BA capability. So a lot of our initiatives actually fall out of that capability map where we're identifying gaps, and then the initiatives are the things that allow us to close them. So to give you an example, benefits management would have been one of the capabilities that we felt we needed to be able to provide, both internally and externally to clients as well. We didn't have a strong capability in that area, so we felt it was something that we needed to develop. So we implemented an initiative, I would say maybe 12 to 18 months ago around that, and now we have a capability there, and it's led to the benefits management piece that we do today at the beginning of a typical discovery phase.
Okay, thanks. So that's a few minutes about our specific practice and how we used BABOK both to guide and inspire us in building a stronger one. I'll just take a few minutes now to just give you an example of how this actually benefited a client in reality. And I'm just going to hand you over to Sean and give you a brief case study.
Thanks, Scott. So currently I'm working on a project for a customer where they have chosen a new solution. The customer is basically setting themselves up as a new company, diverging from their parent company. A lot of change, a lot of new systems, a lot of new technology going into place, and it's a very interesting project, a lot of moving parts. Before I arrived, the main product selection for the transactional day-to-day application was already selected. That's fine. Now, that had a back-end database, etc. What we did have to implement as part of this project was a new business intelligence platform. And this platform was going to have to do many functions. The customer already had a legacy system, an old system that was going out of support. The product was no longer being available. So what we had to try and do was look at the requirements and go, what product do we actually require on site for this customer? The issues here, we do have a lot of competing different stakeholders. We have multi-regions in terms of the customer, different needs. We have operational type reports. We have financial analysis type reports. We have in-depth analysis. We have also reports that need to go out to external stakeholders, external customers. And our customers just didn't know how and where to go about looking for a business intelligence solution. Knowing the fact that we had these internal requirements, knowing the fact that we were going external, so we had a lot of security risks. So they looked towards the consultancy and towards our experience that how would they choose the best product for them, for their business intelligence solution. So they looked towards us, and we have, in version 1, we have a business intelligence function. It implements various business intelligence solutions, and it uses multiple applications, multiple solutions across the board. So we had that experience, we had that expertise. What we did was we went out to our customer, try and work out what was their requirements, what do they actually need day to day. Knowing that we had a self-sufficiency goal, we wanted our end users, the customer, to be able to develop all their own business intelligence reports once we'd actually left the project. So that was one of our core requirements. We also had to look at the technical elements, the security, the risk, the database, the performance, lots of technical items on this, which are typical our stakeholders wouldn't have an idea how to actually measure. So we came up with a matrix of the technical and user requirements. We went through various workshops with our end users we grouped these up into groupings, whether it was look and feel or technology or security or ease of implementation. And we ranked each of the measures. We put a weighting on that in conjunction with our end users. What we ended up getting out of this was a best fit score. We had 4 different products that we evaluated. Our stakeholders reviewed those. We did demonstrations, presentations of them. They reviewed them. And what they got was that they actually scored each of these items, each of these various requirements in turn. So what we did was we ended up with recommendations including the price. Well, what we did have was that our stakeholders, our customer stakeholders, were involved in this. We'd also, because we'd weighted each of the requirements, we also weighted those items such as cost or ease of implementation over look and feel appropriately to get the best score. Our stakeholders chose the product themselves. Our consultancy aided the stakeholders to choose those products. What we were able to do then, and what the customer liked on this, was they had to look at other products. They had other items they needed to evaluate. So they took this matrix, they took this structure that we brought into the company, and they were able to reuse that to look at other types of products. And we were then able to look at other product selections for them, document management, for example. What we also sold here, the customer didn't have a BA function. To some extent, the business analysts were looked at people who were a cost to the project. They didn't really necessarily bring benefit, but what they saw was we brought benefit up front, we brought stakeholders along, and we knew what the requirements were. So we had multiple secondary results on our product selection criteria here.
All right, thanks, Sean. So I hope everybody that's been listening gets some sense of how version 1 sees the BA function, what's different about it, what's different about being a consulting BA. Hopefully they've found it a little interesting to hear our journey towards becoming an advanced BA practice, delivering services to customers, and they got something out of Sean's case study. I think we'll just conclude before we open it out to questions in the wrap-up. I'll just give you our perspective on some of the key industries that we work in. The core concept model that the IIBA have published and developed gives us a way of understanding the peculiarities of particular industries and how a BA might respond to those challenges. So the first one is financial services, which is something that Sean and Keir spend a lot of time in, so I'll hand it over to them.
So financial services, in Ireland anyway, it's an interesting beast. It's going through a lot of change, a lot of restructures. In terms of the context, we need to work out in our financial services. We've dealt with banks, we've dealt with insurance companies, we've dealt with finance companies. Quite often, these industries have been around for quite a long period of time. They have quite embedded legacy systems. A lot of mainframes are still existing out there. And to some extent, people don't actually necessarily know what all of the functionality that these mainframes are providing because they were implemented 10, 15, 20, 30 years back. The industry itself can quite often here have a very low personnel turnover, which again gives us issues in terms of our stakeholder management, not aware of what's happening in the marketplace to some extent. They're also risk averse because of the change levels that are going on. But we've all seen what's happened in the world as well in terms of financial industries in the last period of time. Governance and financial areas is becoming more and more stringent. I'm sure it's not just in Ireland, it's worldwide. This is a context that we have to work in. We cannot take risks with financial data anymore. We have to be very, very aware of this. In terms of the financial services as well, the technology innovation, our end customers want more.
Yeah, so it's really, there's quite a competitive market in Ireland in the financial services industry, and you can break it down in terms of the retail financial services versus other types of financial services. It's highly competitive. Part of that, the reason for that is because Ireland has a very sympathetic tax base, shall we say. So companies need to, financial services companies need to make sure that their offerings are competitive. They also, I think everyone's well aware of the economic climate that we're operating in at the moment with very low interest rates. So another key need there is to be able to maximize profitability, whether that is by reducing costs or increasing fees, or a combination of the both of them, and then also stronger controls just in terms of those regulatory, the increased regulatory controls. We need to make sure, organizations need to make sure that they have sufficient capital adequacy and so on.
In terms of the level of change of financial services, is it based on the types of legacy systems, sometimes based on personnel, but also the industry itself? It can be very resistant or reluctant to change, yet ultimately our customers are looking for more and more changes. The industry is changing so much. The traditional financial houses are not necessarily the standard everybody looks towards. We have supermarkets owning banks these days. We have financial industry, insurance companies, insurance being sold through various new channels as well. There is a lot of change going on, but financial industries so far are so risk averse. They need to drive the technology to be able to move forward with that risk as well.
And yeah, some of the stakeholders that we're seeing out there include regulators. Well, we've spoken about regulators before, customers. So really, if we want to retain your customers, you need to make sure that they have a strong experience when they're using your product. Brokers as well, especially in the insurance industry, very strong relationships. A lot of the insurance companies have strong relationships with brokers. They do a lot of business through brokers, so they're a very important stakeholder. And then finally, as Sean mentioned there earlier, technology is driving a lot of what's going on in the financial services industry at the moment. There's a lot of very innovative technology coming out. An example, for example, would be the blockchain technology. So financial services companies need to develop those partnerships that they have with technology vendors.
In terms of the solution, UX and user experience is very important here. Financial industries are moving more and more online. We need to be able to cater for all levels of personas. And that's something we use a lot here, from our high-tech graduate to our granny who hasn't ever used a computer. Financial industry need to actually make these systems user-friendly. Replacing these legacy systems while combining in with the online systems provides challenges towards our solutions that we need to implement. Very much business rules driven as well. And what we need to do once we provide this is we need to ensure that we make sure we have compliance with the regulators, with all the various financial overseers, reduce that risk in terms of loss of data and loss of information, and provide that efficiency so that we are maximizing profitability as well.
Okay, so when it comes to the public sector, which is where I've been operating for the past couple of years, some of the areas that a BA needs to focus on are, when you're looking at the context of an initiative, the scope can often be very prone to changes in high-level policy, particularly if you have a longer engagement. There might be an election, or there might be public pressure and policy changes, and that can affect your scope, or at least it can affect how you prioritize your requirements. The needs in Ireland over the past few years, the public sector has not been allowed to grow in numbers, so there's a need to do more with less. Obviously, they also are seeking efficiencies, but also there's capacity constraints. So technology is often seen as the solution to the conundrum that they have, which is that the numbers in the public sector have to be contained because of the economic climate, and yet they still are expected to deliver more services. And in the changes, a bit like financial services, you know, these guys have been around a long time. They have their way of doing things, and there are some people that want to embrace change. Some people don't want to embrace change. So there's kind of a mixture of ambition and slow-paced people that you're dealing with in the public sector. Stakeholders is an interesting one because, in my experience anyway, the org charts of these places tend to be hierarchical, and yet your key stakeholders are often in a government department. You might be in a public agency, but they obviously report ultimately up to a minister. That minister is not part of that organization, and yet their interest, their concern can often have kind of, they're a bit like the ghost in the machine. So when you're trying to do your stakeholder mapping and analysis, you kind of have to be aware of that as well. And then finally, on the solution side, obviously a public body or government department is not really trying to make money, so in that sense you think they're non-competitive. But that's partly because they measure value in a different way. But that also gives them the freedom to be innovative because they don't always have to be as sensitive to commercial pressures. They have other ways of defining success. When they measure value, they often measure value in terms of targets, so you know, how many inspections are done, something like that. They often measure value in terms of risk avoidance. So if you are you're a public body that's verifying something, it's not necessarily that you want to catch nonconformities, but you're there to catch the nonconformities. So these are often the way they measure. Instead of profit, it gets translated into these other types of measurements. So that kind of concludes our presentation. I would just end on this slide because you know, the BABOK does have a lot to say, and justifiably so, on the kinds of competencies that a BA has and the kind of values that they should bring to an engagement. Because a BA is trying to help deliver positive change for an organization, obviously there's a certain sphere in which we're working, and version 1 tries to do just the same thing with its core values. They put a lot of time and energy into making sure that these core values are something that's lived and breathed by, well, all our consultants, all our employees. And it helps the VAs to be part of a values-driven organization because values are a lot of what VAs are trying to achieve for their customers. So that finishes up from here. I'll just hand it back over to Deb. If there are any questions that we have time for, we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Scott. We have lots of questions, but I don't think we'll be able to get through all of them. But first of all, I just really want to thank the three of you for sharing your story. And I really liked what you did when you used the business analysis core concept model just to explain, you know, the situation or the concerns of the VA consultant in financial and in public sector pillars. I think that was phenomenal to be able to easily explain what you deal with when you work through those engagements. And it led to a question about, do you apply that kind of thinking when you start an engagement with a client? Do you use the core concept model to be able to pinpoint where you need to start?
Well, we certainly encourage it, and I do personally, and it goes back to something that we were saying in the beginning. You don't have a lot of time to start showing results, and even if the deliverables of the project don't involve, let's say, a business process model, although they usually do, but if there is something that is a core BA skill that isn't required, we still encourage BAs to do it because it's the best way to understand what is required and how to approach the requirements initiative. And the core concept model is one such tool that we use to quickly understand what we're dealing with.
We also very quickly have to get to grips with who are our key stakeholders, both within our organization and external. We have to learn the power brokers in our company very, very fast and work out that relationships. And we also have to work out the context. We're going into new industries every single day. We need to know what are those contexts, who are the regulators, what are the external factors and the internal factors to change it, as well as the language. So yes, we use elements of that.
And just finally on that one, I personally find it very useful to go back to that model because it allows you, before you actually start your engagement, it allows you to gain a very good understanding of what the actual business needs, the problem, the opportunity is, and whether the expected solution actually aligns with what that business need is. And if it doesn't, then you can very quickly start challenging back.
Excellent, thank you. So I think all of us have this one big question. How did you get leadership to back you to move forward on this? You're very busy in your consultancy roles, and to be able to develop a practice internally, you know, what kinds of things did you do to get that kind of leadership support?
I think we had a lot of help from version 1 itself. The company's always been very committed to developing the skills of its staff, and as a result of that we've been through communities of practice, and we're now at a point where we have capabilities across the organization. So the business analysis capability stream is just one of them. So we've put a lot of effort in, but we've also got a lot of support from the company as well.
Every employee in version 1 is assigned to at least one capability, and this is part of their career planning and their career goals. Hence, we try and do things to measure and reward people as well by actually engaging within the capability.
Excellent, thank you. So I have a question about competencies. So when you're looking for the next BA consultant, what kinds of things do you look for in terms of competency that they actually hold and competencies that they should develop?
We look at the person generally. We look at the fit, the personality. We may not look at their back history in terms of their career paths. It obviously helps. We want to make sure they fit in within our organization, within our core values that are on screen as well. And do they have the ability to learn? We believe that we can enable those to learn the BABOK techniques and all the various elements as long as their personality is driven. And it is a consultant's mindset, and that's what we try and look towards.
Just to add to that, we also try to keep an open mind when we're interviewing potential candidates. So if a candidate maybe isn't suitable for the role for which they're interviewing, it's possible that they may have the skills that Sean just spoke about, which would make them suitable for another role which is currently available. So it's not necessarily you're recruiting for the role rather than the individual there anyway.
Okay, great. You have a lot of people that want to work for your organization coming through in terms of the conference. But I do have a question about credibility and building trust. You don't have a lot of time when you start an engagement, but you have to, in order to get or do the work that you need to do, you have to develop that credibility. You have to earn that trust. Can you tell us some of the things that you do in order to ramp up quickly with those really important competencies?
My most recent customer implementing this brand new system, I went in, very first workshop that I was involved in, very first engagement was presentation by the third-party providers on a solution I'd never seen. What you're doing is you have to learn enough about our industry to start with. You do have the ability to, play dumb to some extent, but they look towards the types of questions that you can actually answer. Can you understand the challenge that's being presented on the screen? And engaging with stakeholders, and to some extent, that's not just about the work element as well. It's about the personal interactivity. How can you deal with people on the floor? Can you deal with the lower level employees right up to directorship? So they do look at it, and it's about your engagement, and it's about a personable approach as well.
And I would just add very briefly, it's important to not just come with kind of templates and kind of a cookie cutter stuff. You have to be able to look at what you're seeing and saying, well, this part of my framework, this part of my template library, whatever, would be suitable. And if they can see that you're trying to adapt to them and not just impose things on them, that's a key part of building trust with your customers.
Excellent, thank you. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask this question and ask that each one of you actually provide a response, if that's okay. So what advice would you give to a BA that's looking to start their own BA consulting firm?
My advice would be take the long view. Don't expect it to go smoothly, but dedication is rewarded.
My advice is to look at the person, to look at their skill set, their interpersonal skill set, and how adaptable they are. Bring in the right people.
I would say that core values are very important, and I think you kind of need to really focus on adding value to the customer, to any engagement. I think once the customer, whichever customer it is, once they see that you're trying to add value, you will very quickly be able to build trust relationships with them.
And just the last thing, I know I'm speaking twice, but communication. If you've got a group of BAs, I think that's what's been a key to the success here, is that we've kept the lines of communication open. We keep talking. We don't always get it right, but we keep trying and we keep talking to one another.
Well, that's a great way to end the webinar. Thank you very much, Sean, Kier, and Scott for sharing your story. It's an incredible story, and we really do appreciate you taking the time to be able to do that for us. And thank you to everyone that was able to take time out of a busy day to join us today. For those of you who want to go back and look at the presentation deck, it will be available 3 to 5 business days after today, so please go ahead and do so. And with that, we'll say goodbye and have a great day. Thank you very, very much again, version 1.